Again, I'm arm length. Don't know. I'm not educated in this behalf. Just interested in how I did a video 30 videos back about a criminal complaint of the same person that's speaking of right now, Janet Yellen. Yellen. How do you pronounce that? All right. Anyway, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving legal advice. Okay. So I never look straight forward. Always look around us, be able to protect ourselves by any means necessary, people. All right. And this is one of the things. What are they doing behind closed doors? Remember, anything's done behind closed doors is where tyranny begins.
Neat. All right. Well, when you go to Walmart, when you go to Home Depot, when you go to Target, where are those goods coming from? Well, most of them are not coming from the United States, I can assure you. They're coming from China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mexico, etc. Let's actually go to a visual representation of this from none other than the visual capitalist. And we can see the largest importers in the United States. These are U.S. corporations. The top three, like I just said, Walmart, Target, Home Depot. Number 4, Lowe's, Dole's Food, Samsung, Family Dollar Tree, LG Group, Philips, and IKEA. And of course, the list goes on and on and on. But let's think about this. When you're going to one of these stores, or when you're buying any of this electronic equipment, what you're doing is you're taking your dollars and you're sending them outside of the United States. And you're trading those dollars for the goods that you're buying at IKEA, as an example. So now let's go over to a chart of the United States trade deficit. Well, there's a chart of the trade balance, but I can assure you we are not running a surplus. That is for sure. If we look at the time frame that we discussed earlier from May of 2022 to May of 2023, in 2022 we see the deficit was about 85 billion for the month. Now, fortunately, that improved slightly, but when we get to May of 2023, we're still right around $65 billion a month. So if you just average this out, say, well, it's roughly $80 billion a month, then you come to a number that's very close to the 1 trillion that Janet spent out of the TGA during this time frame. But there's a lot more to the story than just the trade deficit. But this starts to explain what's happening behind the scenes. Basically, Janet Yellen takes all those dollars, spends them into the real economy. The individuals and entities in the real economy take those dollars, and they basically ship them to China, Indonesia, Mexico, or whoever our trading partners are that are sending us the goods in return. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem.
Now, I want to stretch this out a little bit, okay, in my opinion, okay, not attorney, not giving legal advice. He just spoke of individuals and all that, right? Well, in the codes and statutes, individual still means a form of corporation, okay? So Walmart is individual from Home Depot, okay? It's individual corporations. And then it passes on down to your management, right? So manager is individual from the clerk. So when you talk about the person, an individual, they're still talking about the umbrella of a corporate body because it's a person, individual, commerce, business, trust, and all that. But we go into individual, we think it's talking about us, but in fact, it's not. It's talking about the clerks or the separation of the corporation. Again, McDonald's, Burger King, individual companies.
The banks were functioning like they typically do, and extending credit to borrowers. And whether we like it or not, we live in a debt-based monetary system. So you need the debt to continue to go up, assuming that velocity is staying constant. And if you have velocity going down, well, then you really, really need the debt to go up and go up very quickly, or else you're going to go into a deflationary bust, similar to what we saw during the 1930s. Like we said in step number.
Sit there and think about that, right? So we are in debt. We are liable to take care of our debts. And companies could sue us and all that. But who is suing the government for being in debt? All right? Just sit and ponder that. It's okay for the country to be in debt. It's just not okay for you to be in debt. So you're taking your credit card to pay another credit card where you still didn't lose debt. You just transferred debt. And that's what he's speaking of. We're just transferring debt.
Number one, the banks aren't lending, and these monetary aggregates are actually going down. And to tell you how unprecedented this is, the last time we saw M2 money supply actually decline was, in fact, during the 1930s and the Great Depression. Step number 3. Now I'm going to reveal Janet and Jerome's little secret they don't want you to know about. This is something I believe they've been hiding from the general public. Let's start with the chart going all the way back to 2008. We go to today's date on the left, 0 trillion, all the way up to $9 trillion. Most of you will recognize exactly what this is. It's the Fed's BS. And I'll let you determine what BS actually stands for. But we know back in 2008, it was right around 800 billion with a B dollars, under $1 trillion. Then we do quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and we go up to call it 4 or 5 trillion. And then we start to do QT and it goes down, but then we have the repo blow up and they start QE again. And then we have the cerveza sickness.
All right, so sitting there and think about this. All the corporations were basically shut down, and we all was grounded. So there was no money circulating to us, right? So Bill Gates and all of them got richer. But they're talking about the Treasury. So explain how Bill Gates and all of them, why their corporation as well slowed down and they became richer, right? And I'm led to believe they did buy in the stocks of the needles and the face covering, okay? And since they had all this spare change, they invest, and it came out to be that richer. But just sit there and think about that. Everybody else was basically going hungry, getting behind on their bills and all that kind of stuff. And there's certain people climbed up. Just saying.
And you guys know the story from there. The Fed's balance sheet explodes higher, up over $9 trillion. And what I want you to focus on is this red line specifically that highlights the time frame we've been discussing throughout this video. May 2022 to May 2023, when Janet Yellen's checking account went down by over $900 billion, almost $1 trillion. So during this time frame, Jerome Powell's balance sheet went down by about $400 billion. This little blip right there is the BTFP, where they bailed out the banking system in March of 2023. But where?
So then think about that, right? We all starting to learn now the Federal Reserves are the bank. But we're bailing out the banks that the Federal Reserve is over. So we got to bail them out. Why the Federal Reserve banksters don't use their money to bail out their own banks.
Where it gets interesting is when you start analyzing the mechanics behind what happens when the Fed is actually doing QT, or they're reducing the size of their balance sheet. Let's go down here, and it looks, what's a modification on what we did in step number 1? We've got Jerome, or no, forgive me, Jerome Powell right here, and then Janet Yellen right there in the middle, obviously. And she is taking in tax dollars, let's say, from this guy who's pissed off because he's paying his fair share. And instead of spending that money back out into the economy, this time Janet has to do something different. You see, because Jerome Powell has a lot of these treasuries on his balance sheet, and he might not be selling them back into the market, but he's allowing them to mature. So let's say that he's got a treasury that's maturing today for $1 billion. Okay, well, what happens? Janet Yellen has to pay him that $1 billion. We'll assume there's no interest whatsoever. So you got to pay him the principal in full. So does she do that by actually giving him dollars and maybe he spends them back into the economy? No, absolutely not. It's the exact same process as you making a payment to your bank. Maybe you've got a mortgage with Wells Fargo, let's say, and every single month you pay them $2,000. Well, do they actually take dollar bills from you? No, they just simply reduce your balance that you have with them in your checking account or your savings account. So they're not really increasing the asset side of their balance sheet. They're simply reducing the liability side. That's exactly what Jerome Powell does. Remember, Janet Yellen's account is a liability of the Federal Reserve, the TGA. So if she makes a payment to Jerome Powell for, let's say, $1 billion, then he simply reduces her account balance by that much. So in this case, let's say he reduced her account balance from $900 billion down to $500 billion. That's where we get this drop of $400 billion. Now, before we move on, I want to be very, very clear. I'm just using approximate numbers, and there's multiple variables. As an example, Janet Yellen might not be paying Jerome Powell. Janet Yellen could be paying Jamie Dimon. And if she's paying Jamie Dimon for treasuries that he has on his balance sheet with JP Morgan, the exact same process would happen. Her account balance would go down, and those reserves would go into JP Morgan's account, but that would not have an impact on, let's say, M2 money supply, or those broad aggregates that we talked about in step number 1. So I don't want to get into too much detail because it gets very, very, very complicated, and we'll have to save that for a completely separate video. And again, I want to be very clear before moving on. I'm not addressing all of the variables, and I'm using approximate numbers.
So, my understanding, right, all this right here has to do with us, what our dollar for a dollar loaf of bread now became $2 a loaf of bread, and we still only have $1. So we got to make up the difference, not them, to buy that dollar bread for $2. I'm going to point out this right here. How is that possible for Bill Gates and all other major corporations? Why everybody else was basically starving to death and behind on their bills. Just saying. You guys think about it. Anyway, this video was more along the lines as the following part, due to, I thought it was interesting due to Janet, criminal complaints with the other guy, and how this came about, and it was just a educational video. You guys decide, okay? I'm arm length because I really don't know and understand the complete thing behind closed doors, because, well, They keep it closed. That's where tyranny begins, and by gosh, that's where they want to keep it. This is We the People News. Bye, y'all.